Welcome to Equilibrium Echoes, the podcast where we delve into the transformative power of your inner world on your relationships. I'm your host, Alyssa Decker. Join me as we unlock the secrets of emotional equilibrium and dig deep into the tools and insights needed to foster healthier, more fulfilling relationships in ways that feel safe and authentic. Welcome back to Equilibrium Echoes. I'm your host, Alyssa Decker, and today's episode is going to be a little bit different from what we are used to here on the podcast. Today, it's just going to be me, and I am coming to you to bring you a very special sneak peek of my new book. It's called Relationships Are Hard and Other Lies I Believed. And in the book, I detail not only my story through a 19-year, very traumatic and challenging marriage, but also the things that I have learned both in that marriage and healing from that marriage, and what it really looks like compared to what I believed for years. So what I thought I would do is just talk for a moment about one of those lessons, one of those lies I believed that I no longer believe. And then I would love to read for you an excerpt from the book, namely one of the chapters. So this lie in particular has to do with the emotions and the experiences of the other person in the relationship. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to take responsibility for how the people around me feel. Anyone else do that? I can't be the only one. I feel innately somehow, and have for most of my life, or for as long as I can remember, I feel innately responsible for the way that other people experience life and the emotions that they feel and the circumstances that happen in their lives. So, for example, I felt very responsible for how my husband felt. I felt responsible for if he was happy, if he was sad, if he felt neglected, if he felt ignored, if he felt treated like a king, like whatever it was, no matter what emotion he felt, guilt, resentment, anger, happiness, joy, any of those emotions, I felt like as his wife that I was somehow responsible for those emotions. And to a lesser extent, that of my children as well. I always took it very personally. If my children were unhappy, I always went out of my way to try to fix it and get them back to a place where they were at peace and happy. And the problem with that is twofold. Number one, it's exhausting. It is ridiculously exhausting to live your life trying to manage someone else's experience and someone else's emotions. And the reason it's so exhausting and draining is that we are not designed as human beings. We were not created by God to be responsible for anyone else's emotions, anyone else's experience. We were, however, designed to be responsible for our own emotions, for managing our own internal landscape, for listening to what our emotions are telling us, for working to improve ourselves, for listening to our own needs and responding. Ultimately, we, when we're adults, are responsible for caring for ourselves. Every aspect of that is our responsibility and not someone else's. And so when you look at it logically, it stands to reason that if we are responsible for 100% of our own emotions, actions, responses, triggers, all of those things, then by default or by definition, we are not responsible for the other person's emotions or experiences. And yet, so many of us bear the responsibility or try to bear the responsibility for someone else's internal world. And so I'm just here to say right off the bat, you are not responsible. And this is a lie that I believed for years. I totally bought into this lie, carried it around. It dictated a lot of my actions to me. And when I finally realized that my ex-husband was responsible for his own emotions and therefore his own actions and his own experiences and his own responses, I began to find a tremendous amount of healing for myself. It released me from a lot of guilt, from a lot of shame, from a lot of condemnation, from a lot of anxiety. And in this chapter of my book, I break it down. This is lie number 3 that I talk about in the book. I break down what that looked like for me. So the first reason, I said there were 2 reasons this is so harmful. The first is that it's utterly exhausting because we are not designed or even really capable of really truly navigating and managing someone else's internal world. They are responsible for that. The other reason that it is so damaging and so harmful when we try so hard to manage the other person's experience is that we're actually robbing them of a normal human experience. Every human being will experience pain. And when we love someone, we do not want that to be true, right? We certainly do not want our children to experience pain. And yet, the truth is, every human being will experience pain. Pain can be a very valuable resource, a very valuable experience. It's like a guide that shows us what is wrong, what needs to be fixed, what needs to be healed, where our attention needs to go. And it helps us mature and grow into the person we're becoming, which is always an evolution, right? We're never there per se. I don't think we're ever fully done growing until the day we die. But it's a constant growth, a constant evolution and development. And when we manage someone else's experiences so carefully and so tightly, we are robbing them of that human experience. Now, there are a lot of reasons why we might try to manage someone else's emotions so carefully. And I want to touch on just 2 of them here because this is a podcast, not a full-length book. I could probably write a book just about this one topic because, I think so many of us do this out of a place of good intention or out of a place of trying to create safety for ourselves. But that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it healthy. And so I want to talk just briefly about those 2 reasons why we do this. We're doing it out of good intentions is the first reason. Like this is what was happening with my children, right? Absolutely no one listening to this podcast wants to see their little girl or their little boy break down in tears and be devastated because so-and-so wouldn't talk to them or so-and-so didn't want to be their friend or, something else emotionally painful happened to them. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about physical safety here. If you're a parent, it is your job to keep your children physically safe. So please do not think that I'm telling you to allow them to get hurt physically in order to learn and grow. That is not in any way what I'm saying. But when they have these emotionally painful experiences, these relationally painful experiences, someone takes their toy away, someone calls them a name, their best friend decides suddenly they have another best friend, or the boy that they have a crush on decides he's going to the dance with another girl. Like these kinds of experiences are what I'm talking about with our kids. And So often we think that by paving the way, making it smooth and easy, trying to rush ahead and soothe things over before they completely blow up, that we are doing something healthy and helpful for our kids. And what I have learned is that is rarely the case. And here's why. Because your kid is not always going to have you there to smooth the way for them. And these really painful, challenging experiences are what helps them mature, what helps them grow, what helps them develop emotional intelligence. And again, let me be clear, in a case of abuse or someone mistreating them in angry ways, those sorts of things, that's not what I am talking about, okay? I gave some examples already of what I'm talking about, and I know there will be people that say, well, I have to protect my kids because their dad would punch them in the face or whatever. Like I am not talking about instances of abuse here either. Of course, we have to protect our kids from those things. But when we try to make the road as smooth as possible, to take out all the speed bumps, to make sure the water is always calm and it's smooth sailing, we are prohibiting them from developing the emotional intelligence and the relational skills that they need. And so a better approach when it comes to parenting is to walk with them through those experiences, to be their coach and their friend and their teacher in those moments as they're experiencing those things. So when it comes to adults, this can happen with a parent, it can happen with a sibling or a spouse, but most often it's a spouse or an intimate partner, because those are the people whose negative experiences have the most impact on us. And so it's easy to convince ourselves, again, I am going to do everything I can to not make this person angry, to make sure no one upsets them, to make sure life is smooth sailing, because I want their life to be good, and that will feel better for them and for me as well, right? So the first reason then is that we often do this because we're at least somewhat well-intentioned, right? We think we're doing a good thing and we are protecting that other person from negative experiences. But the other reason, and I kind of started to allude to it when I was talking about the first reason, is that sometimes we're trying to create a place of safety or a feeling of safety for ourselves by managing the other person's experience and emotion. And so if you live with someone who has anger issues, for example, or you work for a boss who has anger issues, or you grew up with a parent who has anger issues, and can explode or turn violent or start yelling, sometimes the response becomes, I'm going to manage all of these things so that they don't blow up and explode, so that I don't have that feeling of unsafety, so that I don't have to deal with that emotion, right? So that I can avoid that super duper, a painful, unpleasant experience of the other person having this huge, huge reaction. So if that's you, first of all, I want to say I see you. I know what it's like to feel like you are living with someone who has a nuclear bomb in their chest and they're sitting in your recliner. But there's an analogy I give in my book that I think could be very helpful. I think it is very helpful. And that is that we tend to think that by tiptoeing around and smoothing out all the bumps in the road and trying to make things as calm and peaceful and easy as possible for that other person, that we somehow can prevent that bomb from going off. But I want you to think for a second about what an actual physical bomb, how it works, how a bomb actually works. Most bombs are not set off because they got jostled a little bit. Most bombs are set off by triggers or by timers that are installed by the creator of those bombs or the owner of those bombs. And so what I learned in 19 years of tiptoeing around is that while it seemed to me like working so hard and bending over backwards to try to smooth the road and make life as easy as possible for my husband, in reality, it seemed as though those things were prolonging the time before the explosion, or maybe averting an explosion altogether. But what I really learned was finally that what I was doing may have prolonged the inevitable to a certain extent, but it was never going to be enough to control the reaction to the extent that I could feel safe. It was never going to be enough to create a genuine place of safety for myself or for my kids, because I was not in control of the bomb. And those little things that I worked so hard to always do or never do in an attempt to not set off the bomb were not really the triggers at all. They weren't really the things that were setting the bomb off at all. In fact, the trigger or the thing that typically set the bomb off, I now know, were things that were happening inside my husband that had nothing to do with me, or really very little to do with me. And if I removed all the bumps and worked my fingers to the bone to try to prevent the explosion, it might kick the can down the road a little bit, but the explosion was going to come anyway, because the things that I perceived as the triggers were not the real triggers, right? Okay, so I hope that's making sense. This has been a really powerful thing in my life, to realize that I do not bear the responsibility for anyone else's emotional reaction. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but if you're mean or you're cruel or you say something hurtful to someone else, you are responsible for their pain or their reaction or their feelings about that. And to that, I would say, of course, I am not endorsing you going out and just being mean to someone and then saying, oh, sorry, I'm not responsible for the fact that you feel hurt right now. That is not what I'm saying at all. So please do not interpret it that way. However, I will stand by my statement and say I am not responsible for the way they respond. I am, however, responsible for my actions. I am responsible for my intention, my reaction, my words, my thoughts, my motivations. Everything that comes from me in the relationship is my responsibility. If I am mean or obnoxious and I hurt someone, or I unintentionally say something hurtful to someone else, the way they react is not my responsibility, but my actions were still wrong, and that is my responsibility. I hope that makes sense. So I'm responsible for the action that caused them the pain. I am not responsible for choosing how they react, and I'm not responsible for the emotion or the outcome of their choice and how they react. So here's an example. Let's say that I said something hurtful to you, and I did it kind of intentionally because I was mad, and your reaction was to yell and scream and pick up your favorite vase and throw it at my head, and it breaks on the wall behind me. Who's responsible for what in that scenario? Well, I am responsible for saying something mean and hurtful, and I am responsible for not controlling my own tongue or my own emotional reaction. Am I responsible for the fact that you broke your favorite vase trying to throw it at my head? No, I'm not, because you chose that action. So am I a jerk? Absolutely. Should I apologize? 100%. But That is what I'm responsible for, not what you do once I have hurt you. Now, in that scenario, should I buy you a new vase? Probably. Probably. Why? Not because I'm responsible that you broke it, but because I was the jerk who started the whole thing, and it would be kind of me and a way to make restitution to replace the vase. But ultimately, the fact that you picked it up and threw it is still your choice, and you had the power and the ability to make a different choice regardless of what my words were. Okay? I know it might feel like we're splitting hairs here, but I want you to see how trying to manage all the little details and navigate through life to make sure that everyone else is happy and peaceful all the time is a futile endeavor. And not only is it a futile endeavor, but it is also robbing the other person of their human experience that they need in order to be able to mature and learn and grow. Okay? So, I hope that makes sense. Of course, comment and let me know if it does not, or if you have questions about that. So I want to go ahead and read for you an excerpt from my book. This is chapter 8, and it's line number 3. So in the book, I spend the first 5 chapters telling my story, and it's a pretty raw account. I got pretty transparent about my experience and what has brought me to the place where I am now, where I have this podcast, where I do conflict coaching and relationship coaching for women and couples, and how I learned all of the things that have really made me who I am today and brought me to this place that I'm in now. And then the following chapters of the book are 7 lies that I used to believe that kept me sort of stuck. And not just stuck in my relationship, but stuck in my life and in my growth and in my personal development, and kept me from emotionally maturing and healing because I was believing these things. So chapter 8 is line number 3, which is, I am responsible for his feelings. And I've already given you kind of the overview of what I believe and why I believe it. And so let's read this chapter, because I give a few more examples in here that I think might be helpful as we're unpacking this whole concept today. Of all the lies on my list, this lie is perhaps the most insidious. It's the one that kept me stuck year after year in the belief that I simply needed to try harder. This lie that somehow it was my responsibility to make my husband happy kept me feeling constantly inadequate, blaming myself for everything that was wrong in our marriage. There was a definite cycle to our relationship, and for years we would repeat it over and over again. It would start with the dreaded, "We need to talk." Martin would come to me, say those words, and we would sit down together or go for a walk. He would begin talking about how he felt disconnected from me and how he was offended by my lack of interest in sex, even though it was happening most weeks 2 to 3 times a week. He would muse that he felt so unhappy he had even begun to consider that perhaps the problem was with him. He would often pressure me to tell him if I believed that something was wrong with him. Of course I would say no. Saying yes felt far too dangerous. My no would then encourage him to review his ongoing list of complaints against me. He would cry, pleading with me to do something to make him feel better about our relationship. Most often, I would manage to get in just 2 or 3 sentences in the entire 60 to 90-minute conversation because Martin had so much to say. He made it clear that he was completely disinterested in any form of compromise or negotiation, or really even in what I had to say. He simply wanted to put me in my place and challenge me to do better. Once I would cry and promise to do better, then he would feel better, and the conversation would mercifully end. And then there would be makeup sex. Afterward, he would be content and happy for a week or 2 or 3. But as time went on, he would become more and more frustrated, angry that I was still not meeting his expectations, despite my frantic and desperate attempts to do so. Things would escalate again until I heard the fateful words, "We need to talk." And I would then spend another hour being reminded of my shortcomings and his unhappiness. During these cycles, I would increasingly spend more and more time, effort, and energy attempting to please him. I would initiate sex 2 or 3 times a week, regardless of my interest level. I would compliment him more, touch him more, work harder to make sure his days were smooth and easy. I kept the kids quiet, made sure his favorite cup was washed, double-checked to make sure the cabinet doors were closed, because all of those things would create more tension and irritation. In short, I believed that his unhappiness was all my fault. The reason for this was a combination of my personal beliefs and my husband's words. But regardless, I took it to heart. The extent to which I strove to minimize tension, measure up to his expectations, and care for every detail in order to smooth his ruffled feathers is staggering to me now. But in those years, it was simply survival. It felt like my only option. I've since learned 2 things that have helped me understand what happened in my marriage and why soothing my husband's emotions was never my responsibility. The first was a perspective shift. On the Flying Free podcast, Natalie Hoffman often says that emotions, positive or negative, are part of the human experience. Our husbands, parents, friends, and children will and should experience both. While it may seem like a beneficial exercise to shield them from negative emotions like anger, grief, sadness, or loneliness, in reality, they have both the right and the need to have their own fully human experience. Denying anyone their human experience in an attempt to shield them from negative emotions is not helpful. It prevents them from learning from those emotions and growing and maturing as a result of those very human experiences. The second lesson was the result of a conversation with my husband's counselor. I went to speak to her months after giving Martin divorce papers. He stopped going to therapy after the divorce was in progress, but I felt that as the only person who had spent time hearing from both of us directly about our marriage, she was uniquely qualified to answer my questions. I sat in her office that day and described to her the cycle that I just shared with you. When I was finished with my explanation, I asked one question. Why was it that those tearful, painful conversations and the resulting makeup sex seemed to be the only thing that made him happy? In order to protect Martin's privacy, she answered me in general terms, but the answer was this. When people have difficulty with true emotional connection and emotional regulation, they often mistake emotionally charged monologues and sex for emotional connection. If they carry trauma that makes it hard for them to deeply connect with another person, they will often feel a sense of desperation or a panicky need to feel something, anything, with that other person. If inflicting pain or making demands is their only resource for feeling this connection, however temporary, that is what they will do. The kicker is that they rarely see any issue with the coping mechanisms they have developed, and they're very rarely aware of any pain that they might have caused. Here's the conclusion I pulled from her wisdom. Martin was probably not intentionally choosing to hurt me. However, he was incapable of developing deep emotional connections because of childhood trauma, and he lacked an understanding of true intimacy. I'm not going to share the details of his childhood with you here, but this explained many things for me. Those long lectures and constant demands for sex were not really about my feelings at all, but rather about his desperate need to feel connected, however temporarily. My frantic attempts to help him regulate his emotions were never going to be truly effective. In addition to being ineffective, managing someone else's emotions has 3 problems. First, it deprives them of their normal human experience. Pain, discomfort, and even loneliness are part of normal human emotions we all experience. These emotions, while unpleasant at the time, are part of life. More importantly, they're designed to give us valuable information and teach us things. Pain teaches us that an action or a situation is dangerous. Like a small child touching a hot stove for the first time learns to stay away from that source of danger. When we attempt to remove the pain from another person's life, we're keeping them from learning what not to do. We're removing their opportunity to learn from that painful experience. Now, at first glance, it might seem as though keeping them from pain isn't a big deal. In fact, we often reason that if given the choice, the other person would choose not to experience that pain at all. Of course they would. So therefore, we're not forcing anything upon them that they don't already want. We might also convince ourselves that because they haven't learned up till this point, there's not much chance they will now. So what's the point of putting everyone, including you, through that painful experience again? In the moment, these arguments may all seem completely valid. I know they did for me, but the fact remains that you are still depriving them of the possibility of a lesson learned or an experience that changes their outlook. Second, while it may feel like shielding our spouse or family member from experiencing pain is kindness or will result in keeping peace, this is a very short-lived benefit. While it may feel essential to avoid their unjust attempts to place the blame for their pain on you, that is also just a temporary fix to a much deeper problem. I completely understand the desperate need to try to control the other person's experience this way, because I felt the same strongly for many years. Sometimes it can feel like there is a bomb in the living room, and the only sensible thing to do is tiptoe around it. But the truth is that most bombs are not set off by movement. They're set off at the discretion of the bomb maker. The same is true of the volatile reactions of your loved one. You might succeed in delaying some of their reactions or actions, but the only one who can truly control the actions of that person is them. Which brings me to the third problem with all of our concentrated efforts to keep the other person calm and regulated. It's exhausting. For you, not for them. They might feel great because of your scramblings to make their life as smooth as possible, but you likely feel completely, utterly drained. We are not designed to spend our days managing another person's feelings. God created and designed us to be responsible for one human being, ourselves. You are responsible for your relationship with God, yourself, and others. And they are similarly responsible for their relationships. This is one of those things that sounds so simple and yet is so incredibly hard to do. If you are struggling with the feeling that somehow someone else's anger or dysregulation or sadness or happiness is your responsibility, I see you. I see and hear and understand the pain and frustration you're experiencing. This is what I want you to know. You will never be able to manage their emotions enough, make them happy enough, or take their pain away enough. God designed it that way, and it is good. It's okay to start letting go and allowing them to have their own human experience. It's also good to start taking care of you. When you start letting go of managing their emotions and start redirecting that energy to taking care of yourself, then you have the resources you need to start healing yourself. And one more note, just a little footnote here. If you feel that no longer managing someone else's emotions will lead to violence or a lack of safety for you, please seek professional help immediately. That fear is telling you something that you should not ignore. So, I just want you to know today, you are not responsible for managing anyone else's emotions. And if you are in a relationship where it feels like that's all you ever do and you are exhausted and you're tired of walking on eggshells and you are tired of tiptoeing around, take a deep breath. I want you to just take a deep breath for me and just sit with the thought for a moment that it is not your job. It's not your job to keep them from getting angry or hurt or offended. It's not your job to make them happy or bring them joy or make their life as easy as possible. It's your job to work on yourself, to show up in the world in a way that is safe for yourself and for other people. It's your job to grow into a mature, responsible adult who treats other people with care and kindness and compassion. But their emotion is their responsibility. I hope that that is freeing for some of you. I know that when I first heard this, I was a little panicky inside because I was like, there's no way I can stop managing his experience because it will all blow up in my face if I do that, right? Or on my head or on my children's heads. But here's what happened. As I stopped trying to manage his experience or his emotions, you know what happened? Literally, almost nothing changed. I realized that this tight grip of attempted control on our lives, on this relationship, to try so hard to stay safe, was really not very effective at all. And what ended up creating a sense of safety for me was letting go and taking care of myself, healing myself so that I could show up in the world the way that I wanted to, so that I could show up in that relationship the way that I wanted to. And it wasn't until I let go and I was willing to stop trying to manage the other person's emotions so tightly that I started then to be able to heal and to work on my own triggers and to really begin to become the person that I wanted to be, someone that I was proud of, someone that showed up in a room and brought joy and brought compassion and brought understanding. And looking back now over a few years, if I could say something to myself 5 years ago, I would just say, it's okay to let it go. I know it feels like it's going to blow up in your face. And I know it feels like it's going to be less safe if you stop and you let go and you let him have his own human experience. But whatever happens, when you heal and you work on yourself and you empower yourself to respond to whatever he does in a way that you're proud of, that changes everything. That changes everything. When I stopped being afraid of his reactions and instead started showing up to his big displays of emotion in a way that made me proud of myself, instead of a way that was like fearful and anxious and would do anything just to make him stop yelling, it was a completely different experience. It created a feeling of empowerment in myself, a confidence in me. I started to feel like I had my own back and I was going to be there for me. And that is not selfish. That is healthy. You should be able to completely depend on yourself to be there for yourself, to have your own back. And so that's what I would say to me 5 years ago. And that's what I would say to you as well. And if you need to talk about it, or if you would like to get a copy of the book, please visit me at Coaching with Alyssa, Alyssa, coachingwithalyssa.com. I would love to hear your story and help you demolish some of the lies that you might be believing about your relationship and learn how to effectively change the dynamic of your relationship, whether or not the other person cooperates at all. Thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next time on another episode of Equilibrium Echoes. Thanks for listening to another episode of Equilibrium Echoes. I'm your host, Alyssa Decker, and I want to take a moment right at the end of this episode to invite you to join the book launch team. I'm putting together a team of individuals who not only want a free copy of Relationships Are Hard and Other Lies I Believed, but also would like to join me behind the scenes for Q&As, a free study guide, and more. To learn more and join the book launch team, you can visit coachingwithalyssa.com/book. Can't wait to meet you and see you inside.